In a world dominated by global powers, there are moments that rewrite history, moments when truth stands up against manipulation, and Thesa was one of them. The G7 summit, a gathering of the world's most powerful nations, the place where economic deals, secret agendas, and global strategies are decided. But this time a broken bar. The focus wasn't on trade, or climate, or policy. It was on one man, Ibrahim Traoré. Copyright had a young revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso. The West thought they could corner him, pressure him, maybe even humiliate him. But what happened next? The broken bar shocked the entire world. At his negation scene 1, the invitation that wasn't so innocent. It began with an invitation. The G7 countries are the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, Canada, and Italy decided to invite Ibrahim Traoré copyright to their prestigious global summit. Officially, they called it an open dialogue for cooperation with Africa. But insiders knew something else was brewing. According to leaked diplomatic memos, certain Western leaders wanted to test Traoré copyright to see if he could be manipulated, or at least publicly embarrassed. They didn't like his growing popularity, his defiance, or his alliance with Russia and other non-Western nations. To them, he was a threat. A young soldier from a small African country, a broken bar daring to challenge the old colonial powers. At his negation scene 2, Traoré copyright as preparation. Before leaving for the summit, Traoré copyright held a closed meeting in Ouagadougou. Around a small wooden table sat his closest advisors, a young, determined, revolutionary minds. Traoré copyright spoke softly but firmly, "Greater than they think. I am just a soldier and uniform broken bar, but I carry the voice of millions who refuse to kneel. This isn't a meeting for diplomacy, it's a battlefield for dignity." His advisors nodded. They knew exactly what was at stake. For the West, the summit was about maintaining control. For Traoré copyright, a broken bar, it was about exposing that control to the world. At his negation scene 3, the summit begins. The G7 summit was held in Tokyo. Security was tight, cameras flashed from every corner, and journalists whispered as the youngest African leader entered the hall. He walked in calmly, wearing his traditional military uniform, a calm expression on his face, but fire in his eyes. As he took his seat, several Western leaders exchanged smirks. One whispered, "Let's see how long his courage lasts." But Traoré copyright, a broken bar, remained silent. At his negation scene 4, the trap is set. The French president started the discussion politely. "Greater than we are here to discuss global partnerships and human rights." "Mr. Traoré copyright, your government has been accused of restricting freedoms. Would you care to respond?" It sounded diplomatic, a broken bar, but it was a trap. They wanted to label him as undemocratic in front of the world, to paint him as a dictator siding with Russia. The cameras zoomed in. Everyone waited for Traoré copyright to stumble. But instead, he leaned forward, looked directly into the French president's eyes, and said, "Greater than human rights? You speak of rights, yet your companies drain our minds, your armies occupy our lands, and your banks steal our future through debt. If this is your definition of democracy, a broken bar, then Africa wants none of it." The room went silent. The French president froze, and the journalists, they couldn't believe what they had just heard. At his negation scene 5, the U.S. pressure. Next, it was the American delegate's turn. He said, "Greater than President Traoré copyright, global security depends on cooperation. Aligning with Russia could isolate your country economically." Traoré copyright smiled faintly. "Greater than isolation? You mean independence. You call it isolation because you can't control it. We've been cooperating with the West for 60 years, broken bar, and all we've received are debts, sanctions, and soldiers on our soil. Now, we are standing on our own feet, and that scares you." A quiet gasp spread through the hall. The American delegate shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact. Traoré copyright continued, "Greater than we are not anti-West, we are anti-oppression. And if that makes us enemies and your IS a broken bar, so be it." At his negation scene 6, the shockwave. By the time the morning session ended, social media was on fire. Clips of Traoré copyright as pole dancers spread like wildfire. Twitter, X, TikTok, everywhere. People were talking about the young African lion who spoke truth to power. In Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Congo, and even in Europe millions were sharing the same message. Africa is no longer afraid. One headline from an African news outlet read, "Greater than Traoré copyright S words hit G7 like an earthquake." At his negation scene 7, behind closed doors. But the public meeting wasn't the end of it. After lunch, a closed-door session was held. No cameras, no journalists, just leaders. There, the tone changed. The German chancellor leaned forward. "Greater than President Traoré copyright, we can support your economy. Billions in aid, infrastructure, technology. But you must distance yourself from Russia. It's a bad look." Traoré copyright didn't even blink. "Greater than aid? You mean control? Every dollar you send comes with a chain attached. My country doesn't need pity. We need partnership based on respect." He paused at a broken bar and then delivered a line that echoed through history. "Greater than Africa will never again be a laboratory for Western experiments." The silence in the room was deafening. At his negation scene 8, the French response. Emmanuel Macron finally broke the silence, trying to sound reasonable. "Greater than Mr. Traoré copyright, France has supported Burkina Faso for decades. A military aid, schools, infrastructure." A broken bar. Traoré copyright interrupted, calmly. "Greater than France supported France, not Burkina Faso. You trained our soldiers to protect your interests, not our people. You built roads that led only to your mining sites. You took our gold and left us poverty. That's not friendship, that's exploitation." Macron's face tightened. But Traoré copyright wasn't done. "Greater than if friendship means silence in front of injustice, then I would rather stand alone." At his negation scene 9, the secret deal offer. After the heated exchange, one of the G7 envoys approached Traoré copyright privately. He said quietly, "Greater than we can offer you $10 billion in development funds if you tone down your rhetoric against the West." Traoré copyright looked at him a broken bar and laughed. "Greater than you think freedom has a price tag. Tell your bosses in Europe Africa is not for sale anymore." The envoy didn't reply. He simply walked away, realizing the old game wasn't working anymore. At his negation scene 10, the aftermath. Within hours, international headlines exploded. Ibrahim Traoré copyright challenges G7 leaders live on stage. Burkina Faso president exposes Western hypocrisy. Young African leader leaves G7 stunned. In Paris and Washington, officials called emergency meetings. They were shocked not just by his words, but by the wave of global support he had triggered. In Ouagadougou, people gathered in the streets, waving flags and chanting his name. "Greater than Traoré copyright. Traoré copyright. Africa is rising." It wasn't just about one man anymore, it was about a movement. At his negation scene 11, the turning point. Days later, a leaked recording from inside the G7 session confirmed what many suspected. Certain Western leaders had indeed planned to pressure and isolate Traoré copyright into submission. But instead a broken bar, their plan had completely backfired. Analysts on international media began saying, "Greater than this summit will be remembered not for economic agreements, a broken bar, but for the day Africa spoke with one voice." Even rival African leaders, some previously critical of Traoré copyright, began publicly praising his courage. One Kenyan commentator said, "Greater than he did what many of our leaders are too afraid to do." He looked the colonizer in the eye and said, "And no more." At his negation scene 12, inside the African Union. Weeks later, at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Traoré copyright was invited to speak. In his speech, he said, "Greater than for too long, we have begged for what is already ours. We have resources, we have people, we have strength. What we lacked was unity and courage. Today, the chains of dependency are breaking. Let no leader ever sell Africa's soul for dollars again." The entire hall erupted in applause. Even representatives from countries that once aligned with France stood and clapped. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration of a new African era. At his negation scene 13, the G7's silent reaction. Meanwhile, back in Europe, silence. The official G7 statement mentioned fruitful discussions but carefully avoided naming Traoré copyright. Behind the scenes, Western intelligence agencies began warning their governments, greater than Traoré copyright's influence is spreading rapidly. He's inspiring a generation of African youth. Containment will be difficult, but it was already too late. From Mali to Niger, from Chad to Congo, young soldiers, activists, and students began calling themselves the Traoré copyright generation. At his negation scene 14, Global Impact, Traoré copyright's defiance wasn't just political, it was psychological. It broke a century-old illusion that African nations must always obey Western powers. For the first time, the balance of fear had shifted. Western leaders were now the ones second-guessing their strategies. Even in Europe, some journalists started questioning their government's motives. One headline in The Guardian read, "Greater than did G7 just create Africa's strongest voice against neo-colonialism?" Another in Le Monde said, "Greater than the West underestimated him and now faces a new kind of African diplomacy." At his negation scene 15, the message to the youth. In a later interview, Traoré copyright was asked by an African journalist, "Greater than what gave you the courage to confront them like that?" He smiled and replied, "Greater than when your people are starving while sitting on gold, a broken bar, you stop fearing anyone." "I didn't confront them, I confronted our silence." Those words became a rallying cry across the continent. Murals of Traoré copyright appeared in cities from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, painted with the quote, "I confronted our silence." At his negation scene 16, the final scene, a legacy in motion. Months after the summit, a quiet meeting took place between African defense ministers from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Together, they signed a regional security pact, one that had no Western supervision, no foreign funding, and no outside influence. It was the first of its kind in modern African history. As the deal was signed, one minister whispered, "Greater than the G7 tried to trap him, a broken bar, but he trapped history instead." At his negation, a narrator voiceover, "They tried to silence him with diplomacy. They tried to pressure him with power. But Ibrahim Traoré copyright's voice became louder than all their threats." In a single summit, he turned the political meeting into a moment of awakening. And from that moment, the world began to realize Africa's story would no longer be written by someone else. Because when truth speaks without fear, a broken bar, even the greatest powers in the world fall silent. At the section-ending line, for YouTube closing, "Greater than they invited him to the table to trap him, a broken bar, but he flipped the table and walked out with the world's respect."